When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite. Obey your thirst.
This episode is brought to you by NBA on Prime. The NBA on Prime is back with an exciting week of Emirates NBA Cup action. The knockout rounds begin with quarterfinal doubleheaders on Tuesday and Wednesday night. Then it's a semifinal doubleheader on Saturday. And it all culminates with the championship game next Tuesday night, only on Prime. If you're not a Prime member, sign up for a 30-day free trial to get started today. Restrictions apply. See Amazon.com/Amazon Prime for details.
Every who down in Who Newville liked the holidays a ton, but where to get great prices on gifts, they had no idea. None. They searched and they searched for great gifts under $25. Gifts for spouses and friends and even their toddlers. When suddenly one who shouted, Walmart has what you want, knowing they have Lego, Tree Hut, and low prices to flaunt. So they enjoy the holiday season as Who's often do. Cheering and shouting, Walmart has incredible gifts. Who knew? Find gifts they'll love under $25 at Walmart.
Hello everyone, Chris here, and a quick reminder that this episode of How We're the Podcast is sponsored by LiveScore Bet, a principal partner of Sunderland AFC. LiveScore Bet is the home of the total betting experience, combining LiveScore's real-time updates and stats with great odds and offers, all in one slick, easy-to-use betting app. For more information, visit livescorebet.com or download the LiveScore Bet app. And please remember, over 18s only, and please bet responsibly. For more information, go to gambleaware.org. And now, cue the jingle. Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to How We're the Podcast, sponsored by LiveScore Bet, as we get to that part of the week where we stop looking backwards at the defeat at City and look forward to the small matter of the derby on Sunday, which will be the 143rd time the two sides have met in the league, and we are around 3 months short of it being 10 years since we last met in the Premier League. So I have a couple of gentlemen with me today to help build up to what feels like a big derby in a lot of different ways. But we'll get into all of that because first up, we have a familiar voice who has already booked his table early doors on Sunday so we can get a few in before kickoff, which can only mean our very own Gavin Henderson. Hello, Gav.
Hello, mate. Yes, I am indeed booked in. I'm going down to Deptford. I'm going to avoid all the riffraff in the centre of town, I think. Go to the nice pubs in Sunderland before the match. Nah, I'm looking forward to it though. The build-up's already started with me. Like I am just genuinely counting down the minutes and the hours till Sunday. I can't wait.
You know what it is? We've got all these people listening, Gav, who are planning their days out in the centre of Sunderland, and you're saying they're all riffraff in the centre of Sunderland?
Well, I'll leave them to fight over their Wetherspoons breakfast while I'm eating some fancy pizza or something.
I tell you what, there's been many times Wetherspoon's breakfast saved my bacon, I tell you, on weekends away. But
that was a Calvinism, that one. Saved your bacon.
I'm just glad someone noticed it. But Gav, just quickly before we get into all of this, because we haven't said too much about it, but it was our 300th episode on Saturday after the game that you did after the City game. And, you know, we did our refresh, you know, back in April. We've done 300 episodes.
Mad, isn't it? Yeah, and it's probably apt that we lost and that we had to talk about a defeat on the 300th episode. Although to be fair, for the majority of the time in those 300 episodes, all we've done is talk about how great everything is. So, absolutely. So maybe not, but yeah, 300 episodes is mad, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of, you know, pat our own backs. It's a testament to the effort and work we put in. But we wouldn't do it if people didn't tune in every single day, and we know they do. You see the listening figures and the charts and stuff, so people love it clearly. So yes, the next 300.
Yeah, and that's why I thought I'd throw it to you, because I'm not very good at patting my own back or patting our back. So I thought I'd hand that off to you. But anyway, to our very special guest today, we have a good friend of the podcast who is a journalist who probably knows more about North East football and the rivalries as much as anyone. As a Celtic fan, he's been able to view the ups and downs of both clubs for 30 odd years. And I grew up reading his words on a daily basis to get all the latest. So to talk about the first derby in around 10 years, who better to have with us than Ian Murtagh? Hello, Ian.
Hello, and unlike Gav, I'll be in the press box, so I'll be stone cold sober at kickoff.
Sneak a hip flask in, Manion. Go on.
I'm surprised they don't let you have a little dram or something like that before the game to keep warm.
No, maybe a cup of tea.
well, I mean, just on that, I mean, you've covered. We were just talking before we recorded. I think the first one was 1989. Do you still get excited about these games?
Oh, listen, I think journalists they're very much aware they're huge games, and normally, the last thing you want is a draw. But sometimes for an easy life, but if you cover both teams, then that's the perfect result. But listen, every derby has its narrative. Every derby has its own storyline. And, looking back, one of the first ones I covered was the playoff at St. James's Park in 1990. But, since then, and there've been, we haven't done a derby for nearly 10 years in the league, but that period between 2010 and 2016, I think you had some of the most dramatic derbies we've ever had. There's so many of them. Great goals, great results for both sides. Of course, Sunderland are incredibly undefeated in a league derby for 15 years. A Newcastle fan has to be 25 years old to remember a league win. A Sunderland fan has to be probably 20 years old to remember a time we had a league derby.
Yeah, I mean, all of this, it's music to our ears again. I mean, keep it coming, you know what I mean? But you're talking about when you started covering them, and I'm an age when, I remember your name on the articles back in those early 90s in the Chronicle and the Journal. I mean, going back to when you first started writing about North East football, because going back, my dad used to tell me stories when people used to go and see whoever was at home on a weekend, whether it was Newcastle or Sunderland. And I'm sure I heard the Charlton brothers say they did that. Bobby Robson, if I remember rightly, said he did that when he was young. But, then you come through the 70s and 80s, slightly different, things changed a bit. So when you started covering it, how did you find the rivalry when you first started writing about the two clubs?
Well, it's strange because my mother was a Sunderland fan and the rest of the family were Newcastle, so it was a split household. And I did go to see both clubs, so it was strange. But from 1990, yes, it was as fraught and as fiery and as what's the word? I won't say nasty, but as passionate as it is today. I haven't noticed too much of a change, really. It's always been a fierce derby, without, of course, a sectarian undercurrent of some Old Firm games. But I remember a documentary I was listening to talking about the greatest derbies in the country, and of course it is subjective. And while I would say Celtic Rangers is probably right up there at the top, Newcastle Sunderland, despite the relative lack of success of both clubs, it has held its own, and it is, I think, revered as much as the Merseyside, the Second City derby, the Manchester derby, North London. And then, of course, you've got derbies. Apparently, people say the nastiest ones of the lot are Southampton, Portsmouth, and Swansea, Cardiff. Now, they're smaller scale derbies. I hope no Welsh fans or Southern fans listen to it. But, they've all got their merits. The great thing about this one on Sunday is both clubs, and I know we're talking before Newcastle's game in Bayer Leverkusen, both clubs look upwardly mobile. They're on a bit of a high. For too long when I was writing about the time we had derby, I labelled it the desperation derby. And that's what it really was. This one isn't. This one is between two sides who, are looking up the table as much as looking down.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, Gav, just on that, I mean, I know you kind of grew up in, kind of emboldened in more South Tyneside way, but I don't know if you found when you were growing up whether there was a bit more of a split and you grew up with plenty of Newcastle fans around you. I mean, how did you find the rivalry when you were growing up?
You're right, exactly that. I think South Tyneside is very much split down the middle, and I've never done any real research into it, but I half suspect the reason why there are so many Geordies and Mackems all across the northeast is probably to do with the work migration during the 1900s, where, you know, if a pit shut and another one had work going, full families would move to another village and they would take their allegiances with them. I've always thought with Bolton being a pit village, that might be why it's split down the middle. But obviously, I came around after the pit shut. But still, my dad was introduced to Sunderland by his brother-in-law, who my dad could have ended up being a mag, and this could have been a very, very different conversation. You could have been talking to a Newcastle fan, but you know, I'm over the moon. Obviously, that wasn't the case. But growing up and still now in my group of friends, I've got a really big group of close mates who've known each other for a lot of years, and we're split right down the middle. I love the lads to bits, but when it comes to football, I cannot talk to them about football. We are just not on the same wavelength, and it's like that all over Bolton. The place is split down the middle, and this isn't a nice thing, but it's been known in the past, like, you know, the pubs become a bit of a battleground as the day goes on, and the drink starts setting in around places like Bolton and South Shields, Jarrow and Hebburn, where you've got fans mingling in pubs amongst each other on Derby Day. Generally speaking, we go about our lives daily together, but as soon as it comes to the game, it's a different thing altogether. And I think it goes all the way back to the Battle of Bolton Hill, doesn't it? I don't think we're ever going to really get on. But no, me growing up, it was... I'm just fortunate that I was a Sunderland fan and I wasn't one of them, I think. And that's how I've always felt about it. But, you know, they probably think the same about us, don't they?
I'd say you literally do live on the battleground.
I'll tell you what I think has changed since I started. The Northeast media, and I'm talking very much in broad terms here, when I first came into journalism, it was, I would have said that the majority was Sunderland fans. I could talk about the elite of people now that they've retired, you know, Doug Wetherill, who's still going strong in his 90s, Sunderland, the likes of Bill Bradshaw, Paul Clive Hetherington, Jeff Brown, Martin Howie. There were less Newcastle fans back then in the media box. Of course, let's not forget, we're not fans when we're doing our work. But I think it's slightly different now. There's probably more of a black and white persuasion than red and white.
Just on that, how was that, Ian? You know, when the seasons came around, when the two were coming up against each other, how were those covering it? Because, like you said, even the Northeast media was split. They're full of Sunderland and Newcastle fans. I mean, how was that when everyone came together for those? Well,
it was all right because this might sound contrary to what I've just said, but in all the derbies I've covered since 1989-90, I've never once seen a journalist jump up and celebrate a goal, whoever scored it, and I hope I never do. So, you know, when a goal is scored, you're busy. First and foremost, you haven't got time to celebrate. You're busy writing down the facts, checking out what happened, etc., etc. So, you know, you do have to stay neutral when you've got a pen in your hand or you're typing.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Well, going back to that, when you first started covering the sides, I mean, both sides were pretty much on an even keel back then, weren't they? When, you know, it was kind of going up to Division 1, coming back down again, not really establishing themselves, late 80s, early 90s. But, you know, it was kind of, both sides were pretty much in the same mould until it all kicked off.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in mid-80s, of course, Newcastle had the Geordie triumvirate of Waddle, Beardsley, Gascoigne. What a trio they were. You know, Sunderland, in terms of star quality, didn't have those players. But when Sunderland won the derby in 1990 to go up, I can remember reading a Newcastle fanzine a few months later, and they were bemoaning the fact that Newcastle's veteran side, which had the likes of Mick Quinn, Roy Aitken, Mark McGee, were on the road to nowhere, while Sunderland had these very promising youngsters, Gabby Deeney, Bennett, Owers, Armstrong, would do well in the Premier League. Well, it was a Division 1 at the time. It didn't quite work out like that. And then 2 years later, and I think the second coming of Kevin Keegan at St. James's Park, I think, changed the whole landscape, really. I would say up to then, and the two clubs were level pegging. There were times when Sunderland were the bigger club, the more successful club. But I think in terms of fan bases, with when you had a choice, when kids had a choice between Kevin Keegan and Mick Buxton as the two managers, all of a sudden a lot of neutral areas and a lot of mining areas, as Gav was talking about, such as Ashington and Beddington, which had hardcore Sunderland support. Suddenly, the sons and grandsons of Sunderland fans decided to support Newcastle, and I think things did change a little bit then.
And on top of that, Ian, and I still know people who get referred to in that way. There are people who would stand on the forward end with their mates when they were younger, and then when Keegan came around, were Newcastle fans, and they're still called turncoats to this day. The people don't forget. The people have got long memories. They'll see these people they know who sort of celebrate being Newcastle fans. And they go, I knew when you were a Sunderland fan. I knew you when you used to go to the games. I know one fella who actually got married at Roker Park with a red and white shirt on, and I'm not going to name the fella, but he's well known around my parts, and he's well known in the bars of Newcastle for singing on a match day on the tables and things. And everybody knows he used to go to Sunderland game, but this was a thing. Before Keegan came along, there were a lot of people in that boat who actually, they just kind of went where their mates went. They went to they were in the Full End one week and they were probably in the Gallagher the next. But they firmly planted their flag in the ground when the Keegan era came around and they did pull away from Sunderland.
Yeah, I think it's probably only now what we're talking over 30 years later, when Sunderland are threatening in all areas of the club to be a big club and competing with the best again. It's taken there have been periods of ascendancy on the pitch, especially in the 10 to 17 era, and Sunderland have always had a massive fan base and a loyal fan base, but Sunderland do not have the international fan base that Newcastle now have. They might get in the years to come, but I think you can take the growth of Newcastle, nothing to do with the recent takeover. It stemmed from Keegan becoming manager in 1992.
Well, I was going to, because it is interesting when you think about it, Ian, because obviously Sir John Hall coming in. I mean, on one front, do you think it kind of caught Bob Murray by surprise, in terms of the money being spent by Sir John Hall in the Premier League? But the other thing is, because you are right that it's, in terms of the rivalry, it started to diverge at that point. But how much do you think it put Sunderland back?
Quite a bit. Bob Murray, he did great things in terms of the relocating the ground, the Stadium of Light and the Academy of Light and Foundation of Light, but he couldn't compete with John Hall. Just as John Hall realised he couldn't compete with the billionaires and the nation states after that. It's that period in the 1990s. And I'm going to raise an interesting point here. If you remember Newcastle, the great entertainers, everyone's second favourite team, Kevin Keegan, Mr. Charisma, but also it coincided Angel of the North, the Millennium Bridge, the regeneration of the Quayside. Economically, Sunderland was being left behind, as well as in football terms. Now, of course, the comparison isn't perfect, but you look at Sunderland now, you look at Shipfolds, you look at the footbridge, you look at the sprucing up of the stadium and the money Sunderland is spending. There's a feel-good factor about the city. There's a feel-good factor about the football club. And, dare I say it, Sunderland are many people's second favourite club now. So whereby I'm not saying Sunderland will be challenging for the title this season in the way that Keegan's Newcastle did 32, 33 years ago. You can see there are fair comparisons between what's happened black and white 30 odd years ago and what's happening red and white now.
No, it is interesting, and you've done it without a manager who you wouldn't really call Mr. Charisma either. But Gav, just going back into, because you kind of started going in the 90s to see Sunderland, and of course when we were in the Premier League the last season at Roker Park, the away fans were banned. Now, do you think that's kind of the worst it's got between the two fans in terms of that rivalry where it got to those lengths?
Quite possibly. I mean, you'll be able to remember even further back than me, Chris, the pitch invasion during the playoff semi-final, which is probably, as ugly as it's got really in terms of violence. But then in more recent times, there's videos floating around on YouTube and what have you of the fans digging into each other on the way to St James's Park as the convoy from Central Station was led up to the stadium. And it has been a bit ugly, but in terms of the not letting the fans in the ground and that, I mean, well, it's not. I would like to think we're never going to get in that situation ever again. We've seen it in the last few years with Celtic and Rangers, haven't we, where they weren't able to agree on allocations and they just decided no away fans. And to be honest, if you look at the allocation this year, it's the closest thing to not letting fans in the ground, really. They've went for the absolute bare minimum allocation for Newcastle fans because Sunderland were told they won't sell that tier at the bottom of level 7 in St James's. So we said, well, you're only getting 2,500 too. But I mean, yeah, I guess so. I guess that's probably as bad as it's been. I mean, when I started going to games, I was fortunate, and I've talked about this quite a bit. When I was properly going to games home and away as a kid, it was in the thick of the Peter Reid era. I can remember the game in the rain and me dad coming home, and it was paper tickets back then, and in his pocket was just a pile of mush. He was drenched to the bone. And then the year after, me being there and watching Quinn score that unbelievable header that he did, and Don Hutchison dancing in front of the Newcastle fans with Mickey Gray. We were, to be honest, we were quite spoiled as Sunderland fans at that time with them 2 wins, because they'll probably go down as 2 of the greatest ever. And it was sort of after that point, wasn't it, when the Reid era took a turn for the worst, and then the sort of Bobby Robson era at Newcastle picked up, and we did feel inferior to them. I mean, I've got no qualms in saying that. I can remember going to them games and seeing us battered and just feeling so inadequate as a fan to see us lie down the way we did against them lot. Yeah. The game, I remember when Bellamy and Shearer scored away at St James's, the 3-2 when Mick McCarthy was manager, where we actually put up a good fight and scored 2 of the best goals we've ever scored in a derby that'll never be remembered.
Stephen Elliott's was brilliant that day.
And Liam Lawrence's. They were both unbelievable goals, but you try your best to try and find them goals online. They're difficult to dig out, but they were 2 of the best goals we've ever scored in a derby game. And then, then there was
remember that game, Cal. I can remember that game, that 3-2, because it was this season, I think everyone knew Sunderland were going to be relegated. And it's the only time I seem to recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sunderland fans, if not celebrating, they were so relieved that it wasn't a thrashing and that Sunderland had made a game of it. There wasn't this sort of the despair and the huge disappointment of a normal derby defeat, because Sunderland, as you said, scored 2 good goals, and I think it was Emery settled it in the end, wasn't it?
Yeah, and obviously later in that season we got battered 4-1, and that's still. I mean, I was there. Sorry for people to listen, by the way, dredging up all these horrible memories, particularly in a week like this. But I was there for the 5-1. That was bad. But for me, the 4-1 at the Stadium of Light is the worst I've ever felt at a football game, because they knew before they walked in the ground they were going to beat us, and we went ahead as well. So for a lot of years there was this real inferiority complex about ourselves, because we were inferior, unfortunately, and didn't feel like we were on at a time when they were playing in Champions Leagues and things. We were really struggling. But obviously, these things come around, and by the time the next sort of wave and generation of Sunderland teams entered into the Premier League under Keane, and then going forward, we took over that mantle as the dominant force in them games. Yeah. And as Ian mentioned before, been 15 years since we lost the derby. But yeah, for a big chunk of my time coming up as a Sunderland fan, I'd had that really good period under Reid, and then a lot of years of just not being able to beat Newcastle, and it wasn't very nice.
Yeah, well, before we get into Ian's top memories, I think that's a good time for a big break. So we'll be back after these.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like needing the protection of an offensive guard on the football field, but getting an elementary school crossing guard. Sure, they're both guards, but you can only trust one to keep your quarterback safe when the game is on the line. So don't settle for just any insurance when there's State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
This episode is brought to you by McAfee.
Yes! Playoff tickets! Just need to click here and... Wait, what? Fake site? Good thing McAfee threw the red flag. That would have been $400 gone.
McAfee blocks risky sites so you don't pay for seats and other things that don't exist. Plans start at just $39.99 for your first year. That's cheaper than parking on game day. Learn more at McAfee.com/online protection.
Oh, Hilton stay, your beds are soft and cozy. No lumpy couch, no stiff futon, no shower line at crack of dawn. Oh, Hilton stay, oh, Hilton stay.
When you want holiday comfort you can count on, it matters where you stay. Enjoy comfortable rooms and friendly service when you stay with Hilton instead. Save up to 25% this season when you book with Hilton. Hilton for the stay. Terms apply.
And welcome back to How We're the Podcast, sponsored by LiveScore Bet. And Ian, we're just listening to Gav rattle off all those memories of top games, top goals, and all this sort of stuff. But which derbies, thinking back, stick out for you the most, either for what happened on the pitch or maybe what happened off the pitch, if you had any interesting interviews or anything like that before and after?
I remember before one derby, and I can't remember which one it was, but taking Mark McFadden of A Love Supreme and Mark Jensen of the Mag out to lunch. And, I'd seen this type of thing on TV and in newspapers. I thought, a good idea to sort of do a joint interview with the two of them. That was when I was on the Journal. And that worked really well. But as I said, I can't remember which derby that one was. I hated the two behind closed doors derbies. It was, I remember, there were Newcastle fans somehow got into the Roker Park, and there were Sunderland fans who got into St. James's Park in the game where Chris Waddle played for Sunderland.
Yeah.
The stick that day he got was some of the worst stick I have ever heard in my life. And he laid on the goal. I think Michael Gray scored. It was a 1-1 draw.
Yeah.
And I could just remember this huge roar behind the press box, and several corporate boxes were dominated by Sunderland fans, and I think there was a bit of trouble among the hoi polloi.
Yeah, I remember there was a Newcastle fan in the clock stand seats who jumped up to celebrate either Ferdinand or was Ferdinand got two or Ferdinand Beardsley. That's it. I think it was Ferdinand's goal, and he jumped up, and you saw him for a brief second before he was engulfed in Sunderland fans and disappeared.
That's none of that this time.
Yeah, but actually, just on that, Ian, again, because it was a bit of a travesty, wasn't it, that away fans were banned? I mean, was it just a bad decision, or were things as bad as they've ever been, do you think, at that point?
Do you know, I can't actually remember what the specific reason was. Was it a police decision? Was it a club decision? I can't remember. Of course, it was a time where Roker Park's capacity had been severely reduced.
Yeah.
But in previous years, there hadn't really been a problem when Newcastle had half the Roker end, and Sunderland had the other half, and there was a massive police cordon in between the two. I can't remember why specifically the two games in are we talking 96, 7 were home fans only.
Yeah, it was a real strange one going back, but. Just going back to covering the games from a journalist point of view, Ian, I mean, how easy is it to kind of build up the game and write stories in the week building up in terms of the managers and the players? And looking at the staff at the clubs, do they treat the media any differently in a build-up to a game like this?
It was very different writing for a regional newspaper to a local newspaper. Of course, the build-up would start on the Monday or Tuesday, when you're working for the Journal or the Chronicle or the Sunday Echo or the Northern Echo or the Shields Gazette. And you would try and get as many player features as you could, and you'd get former players' opinions, etc. While with nationals, of course, the game only really the build-up only really started maybe the Thursday or the Friday before big preview in the weekend. And then, no, I don't think there was any difference. Of course, managers, one manager infamously trying to downplay the derby, and I plead guilty to causing this controversy because it was when we were chatting to Ruud Gullit. It was when Newcastle's training base is at the cricket ground, and I asked him, how big do you regard this derby? You played in derbies, in Holland, and Italy. How big do you regard this derby? He said, derby? It is not a derby. How can it be a derby? And I was thinking, as I was writing all the goal dust down. And, it was quite staggering. He just didn't understand what was happening. And of course, I don't know if either of you can remember, that was the famous 2-1 in the rain at St. James's Park, where Gullit resigned afterwards. And everyone knows that Paul Robinson was preferred to Alan Shearer and Duncan Ferguson. What people don't know, and it was almost like, if you pardon my French, a piss take in the programme. Of course, Paul Robinson, born and bred Sunderland, and there was a special interview with him in the Newcastle programme that night. And he was talking all about his love for Sunderland and how he used to look good standing on the forward end as a kid. And you thought, has this match day programme been sabotaged? But no, it was there. And of course, he did very little on the pitch. Quite frankly, he did very little in his Newcastle career. But, it must have been manna for heaven for Peter Reid. If the famous incident in the press room before the kickoff, I don't know if you remember Tim Rich, he was the cricket writer for the Sunderland Echo, who came over to the Journal, one of the most talented writers I've had the privilege to work with. And when the team sheets came, and Tim in a very loud voice said, "My goodness, this isn't so much a team sheet as a suicide note." And I was next to him. I said, "I'd have kept that for yourself, Tim." We all used it. It was such a good line. We would put a suicide note. And he could have had that all to himself.
And there was that famous picture of Bob Murray and John Ficklin in the Newcastle boardroom or something, or somewhere in the Newcastle hospitality with Sunderland strips on.
I think, let's say they milked that victory.
Yeah, because they got soaking wet in the rain, and the only thing they had to change into was spare strips.
That's right. It didn't go down well with John Hall or Douglas Hall, I remember.
No, I imagine not. But Gav, I mean, just talking, listening to Ian talking about, the Ruud Gullit thing, saying it's not a derby, it's a normal game and things like that. If you're just the press right now, and you know how much he likes players to focus on the football and to make sure that they've got their instructions and know how to play, how does he play this? Does he build it up? Does he play it down?
I think when you consider his role as a coach, I don't think, and we've got a very interesting blend of voices behind the scenes at Sunderland. I don't think Regis Labrisse's role is necessarily as the man manager in the group. He's very much a coach, and everybody knows he's a coach, and he's the decision maker and the tactician. But I think that sort of tub thumping, this is what it means sort of thing will be left down to people like Granit Xhaka, like Luke O'Nien, like Dan Neil, people in the club who know what this means will be tasked with getting that message across. I don't think that'll be Regis's role, which might sound quite strange, but that's really the way he's managed the team since he arrived. We talk often, don't we, about how calm he is as a presence. And I think that will be important because you can't be the one screaming and shouting and bashing your fist off the walls and saying, let's get into them, but also be the one telling them to calm down in moments where you need calm. I think it's important. He has his job as a coach. You maybe leave that side of things to Granit Xhaka. And I'm sure from the minute each and every one of these players have walked through the door at Sunderland, they will have been made fully aware of what this means. I mean, the club is full of not just Sunderland fans, but Newcastle fans. I mean, a lot of the media team are Newcastle supporters, and you've got Sunderland supporters in the squad, in Dan Neil and Anthony Patterson. a lot of the younger players who are around the first team squad. So, Chris Rigg being someone of mixed allegiance, you don't need. I don't think it's a case of a bit like what you've got a Ruud Gullit who clearly just doesn't get it. I don't think there's any room these days to not get it. And you've watched this team like I have this season, and you've seen just how much they do get it. They get what it means to be a Sunderland player. So I think I don't think there can be any question that they're going to know what's going to hit them at the weekend, and that's important. It really is important because Newcastle will be having the same conversations. Their players will be having the exact same chats about what this means to the fans, to the region, to the area, and you can't let that engulf you too much either, because if you do, the emotion of the occasion will just swallow you up. We've seen that with the FA Cup game a couple of years ago, and also there are players still in the squad who were part of that team who saw what it was like to get beat handily, and probably did get lost in the occasion, and that will have been a really vital learning experience. And obviously since that point, we've gone through some massive games as a club. I would argue, the way that we got to the playoff final and then won the playoff final, it's up there with playing Newcastle and beating Newcastle. The high that you feel from achieving something that makes so many people so happy and thriving in that pressure of the situation. That's going to be vital experience going into this game. It's got to be. So I'm pretty content with how we're shaping up in terms of that. I don't think there can be any concerns about how up for it the players will be, but also how important it is to have somebody like Reggie Slibbery's calming things down at the right times.
Yeah, well, I mean, Ian, you've seen a lot of managers come and go on both sides, and I doubt at the minute that there's been two more calmer characters in charge of both clubs at the same time, like we've got at the moment. But how do you see the two managers playing it in the build-up? Because, like you said, Ruud Gullit made that gaff. Basically, he's telling the players it's just a normal game, and it's not really, is it?
No, that's an excellent point. I think we've got two very highly rated, very impressive individuals in charge of the two clubs, in Labrice and Howe. Listen, derbies these days, they're not so much passion plays as, tactical contests. And you've got two very esteemed coaches going head to head, and it's going to be fascinating how it plays out. What Gavin said so eloquently was, Regis Dupreez won't be pumping up this place. And I hope he doesn't, because let's face it, when you saw Sunderland against Arsenal, for example, could they have been any more committed in those opening minutes? In fact, you wouldn't want them to be more committed, more pumped up than they were there. Otherwise, you risk another red card. We've seen it like that before. I think sometimes it's a case of telling people to calm down. What I would say about the game is Eddie Howe will want Newcastle to start with a intensity, which is their hallmark. Sunderland have got to be prepared for that. If Sunderland are as lackadaisical as they were against Everton, or as loose as they were at times in the opening 10, 15 minutes against Bournemouth, then they probably will lose the game. They've got to go into that game in the way they did against Arsenal, in the way they did in so many home games this season. It's you've got what you've got here. I mentioned earlier, this isn't a desperation derby. This is a game between two pretty decent sides who could both well finish in the top half of the table this season. When was the last time Tyne we had both finished in the top 10 of the Premier League?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't like to think, to be quite honest. It'd be quite depressing. But actually, just on how they both got there, Ian, because we talked to you last time about Newcastle United off the pitch, and we talked about Sunderland's approach kind of off the pitch and how the two clubs have gotten to where they are now. Sunderland have built this momentum, built something with a group of young players. Newcastle obviously went down a very different route to try and get success, and you've talked about that previously. But that comes into the rivalry now, doesn't it? Because the clubs have got a very different feel about it, and they've almost gone in completely different directions in terms of how they go about their business.
Yes and no. What I do find very interesting, Chris, is on social media, you've had fans of both teams picking a time where select 11. And what is interesting, and dare I say it, there is grudging respect for the adversaries. I saw Newcastle fans pick a team which had 4 Sunderland players in, and see Sunderland fans have a team with 4 or 5 Newcastle players in. So I think, you're not getting fans making wild predictions this week. I think that whether you're black or white or red and white, your opponents on Sunday are a pretty decent team, and they will know that their opponents have probably almost as much chance as they do of winning the game.
Yeah. And just on that off the pitch thing, Gav, because, we had conversations years ago, Gav, and, when we're in a mess in League One, that when Newcastle did their thing and went the way they did with kind of state ownership, we were having conversations saying that there was a real opportunity for Sunderland to go the opposite way and be a real community club. And we kept saying it was for someone with their head screwed on to come in and do it properly, and then maybe even get some of the neutrals in the northeast because of the path Newcastle took. And actually, eventually someone was clever enough to do that.
Absolutely, yeah. I think what you can't argue with is the way the club, certainly in the last 12 to 18 months, have really ramped up in terms of, we are serious. It's apt, actually, when we're talking about the derby. If you think back to the feeling about the club at the time of the last time we played, with the whole Black Cats bar thing and all the fallout from that, and kind of laying out the red carpet for Newcastle, the feeling wasn't good. We had a team at the time that wasn't performing. We had a manager that nobody wanted. The turnaround since the last time we fought, and that was the start of 24? That wasn't long ago.
Less than 2 years ago.
Yeah. So, the progress we have made since that game is astonishing. And it hasn't just been about spending a lot of money. We've spent a lot of money, don't get us wrong. But you look at the team which we put out each and every week, it wasn't I wouldn't say it was a drastically expensive team we assembled. Habib Diarra, our record signing, has barely kicked the ball. Simon Adingra, who hasn't been called up by the Ivory Coast to go to the AFCON because he's not playing games, cost us 20-odd million quid. Shemsden Talbi, 20-odd million, has been in and out the team. Brian Broby only just started his first game at Anfield. You could go on and on. A lot of the money we've spent this year has been spent on players we're trying to develop and introduce slowly, and in the case of Diarra, hasn't been anywhere near. So this team that we're seeing now in the Premier League competing at the top end, yes, we spent money, but it wasn't all expensive to put together. I think I totaled around 22 million quid was that back five at Anfield. Collectively, Ronaldo cost nothing. Ballard was a couple of million. Hume was pennies. I think Gertruida was a loan. Mukiele cost 10 million. Alderete was 10 million. It wasn't an expensively assembled defense. Where I'm going with that is whilst, yes, we've spent money and a lot's been made about it, if you actually dig down into it, the players we've spent money on haven't all featured necessarily. And the core of this team, you look at the likes of Wilson Isidore, Enzo Lefebvre, Ballard and Hume, I mentioned before. Roofs being such a good goalkeeper that didn't cost us too much. We've got a real core of players there who have really bought into the identity of the football club. I think we have done it the right way. I don't think this has just been a case of let's just splash the cash on a load of top names. Shaka aside, there weren't top names. And you've really got to commend the way we've built this team up. And it's gone hand in hand with everything else. You mentioned about the conversations we were having about it being a community club. I think that's been the case. I think one of the overlooked things off the pitch has been the way the club have. I'm not saying they've gave in to fan demand with this, but they've certainly listened to supporters in how they feel pride in the outfit they wear, the kits we've got now. There was a point there where you would walk around the town and you wouldn't see a single new Sunderland shirt. Hummel is everywhere now. Everyone is decked out head to toe in the stuff. People are proud to wear it because the team on the pitch make them proud as well. They've got a proud football club. There's just a really good feeling about the club at the minute. And I know that's not going to last forever, but it's about making the most of it right now. And I think what we were predicting might be the case 18 months ago, 2 years ago, or whatever, is starting to come true. And I think that this game at the weekend is a really, really good opportunity for us to show the people who, understandably, maybe shot us down, laughed about Sunderland, took the mick when we were in the doldrums in League One. This is our chance to show, we aren't a club anymore. We're not a mess anymore. We're a proper football club who are actually looking to kick on and push and progress and be at your level.
Look, I'm on record as saying I hate the controversial Newcastle ownership. I don't want the North East club to be owned by the Saudi regime. But I'm a huge fan of Eddie Howe, and I think the new Newcastle CEO, David Hopkinson's made a very impressive start as well. Newcastle fans have every right to be proud of their manager and their team. Sunderland fans are proud of the whole structure of the club right now. Kirill has become so popular with the fans. I don't think he could. I think it took him about an hour to walk across the footbridge. So many people were patting him on the back before the Wolves game. But what I would say is similarities between the two clubs. Everyone is quite rightly praising Sunderland's recruitment drive in the summer. There's barely been a signing which has been anything less than excellent. But bear in mind, Eddie Howe's record at Newcastle over the last 3 years has been very, very good indeed as well. It's probably actually only the summer signings. There's still question marks over Elanga and Ramsey, and they haven't really had time to prove themselves yet. But, as I said, we are talking about two very, very impressive squads here with players who were bought for a lot of money, but whose value has probably gone up in the time they've been at their respective clubs.
Yeah, just on that point, Ian, because you touched on it a bit earlier as well, that, does it feel like we're at one of those points, because we talked about in 1990 and then the early 90s where, one club then was on the ascendancy and the other was falling away. Do you think now, where do you think we're at the moment? Do you think there's a possibility that we're maybe on the cusp of that, where maybe Newcastle, after a few good seasons, are falling away a little bit and Sunderland are on the ascendancy? Or do you think we're on the edge of an era where both clubs might actually compete in the top half of the Premier League for a good few years?
I hope that's the case, what you said afterwards. I don't think Newcastle are going to fall away. I know Newcastle fans in the build-up to this game, they haven't been slagging off Sunderland, but they've been pointing out, and Sunderland fans can't really counter this argument. They're saying this is Sunderland's biggest game for 7 years. Newcastle have 3 big games in 7 days. The fact they're playing Champions League football is undeniable. The fact they are in the quarterfinals of the League Cup is undeniable. They could go back to Wembley maybe for the 3rd time in 4 years. Sunderland are not at that stage yet. But when that match kicks off at 2:00 on Sunday, there won't be one Newcastle fan who will be totally confident of victory, which you couldn't say about the last debacle at the Stadium Night in the FA Cup, can you?
No, definitely not. Like I said, I had a quick look and I mentioned it's almost 10 years. And I also looked since the two sides first met in 1883. This has been the longest gap where the two sides haven't met in the league outside of wartime. There was a gap of almost 7 years in the early 70s, and then there was about 4.5 years in the late 80s. But I was going to ask you, Gav, because that's the longest gap we've not played them in the league. I mean, does that have an impact from a fan's perspective?
Yeah, it does, because from Newcastle's perspective, I think whilst they'll have enjoyed the fact they beat us in the cup last year, they're all aware that we were a poor championship team, and there's a feeling now where we're both back on the same sort of level. I mean, we're above them just in the table. And from our perspective, we've waited a long time to prove people wrong. Newcastle haven't beaten Sunderland in 15 years in a league game, so they're going to want to put that right. So I think it does make a difference. I think it's a bit, obviously we haven't got a crystal ball here. We don't know how the game's going to go at the weekend. But when we face them again in March, there's going to be a slightly different feeling about that game. This is the first time the two teams have met in the Premier League for almost 10 years. So this is a very different derby. I mean, the last one was a very different derby. it was a cup game. But for me, this one, particularly given both teams are good, because how many times down the years have we both been decent at the same time as well? That's another thing.
Mm-hmm.
You probably have got to go back to when Bobby Robson was the manager, don't you? And Peter Reid was the Sunderland manager. It's the last time that both teams were good. When I look back at the run of 6 games where we won, we were fighting relegation, and in a bunch of them seasons, they were fighting relegation. In fact, they got relegated last time last time we played. They went down, didn't they? So we had a year there where we got relegated from the Premier League while they were in the Championship. So the feeling here is, we've probably never been on a more even keel for a very, very long time. And that's what makes it interesting. And it's strange to me. Like I say, I've got a lot of friends who are mags, and they aren't confident whatsoever. I mean, their away form's been poor this season, so I understand it to a degree. But they're also looking at us and looking at how well Sunderland are doing and how well we've done at the Stadium of Light this season. And I don't think they're looking forward to it. I don't know a single Newcastle fan who's actually looking forward to this. And I know a lot of Newcastle fans. Might change at the weekend. But at the minute, I think they would much rather we were bottom of the table and struggling and clawing for points like Wolves are, as opposed to being so high in the Premier League. I think that's totally changed the whole outlook of this game. And that's why the conversation is very different to probably what it was when the fixtures came out. When the fixtures came out, I think Newcastle fans were probably looking at Sunderland and going, well, you'd be lucky to stop up, like a lot of people were. But obviously since then, a lot's gone on and that's changed the landscape a little.
Just on that, Ian, just because we mentioned earlier on how, Newcastle doing well in the 90s put a lot of pressure on Sunderland back then. Newcastle had finished in the top 7 for the last 3 seasons, and then they only won 3 of their first 11 games this season. Do you think by Sunderland doing so well, do you think that added a little bit of pressure onto Newcastle, and maybe the fans were a bit impatient during that period?
What I would say is, had this game taken place about a month ago, I think Sunderland fans would have felt a lot more optimistic and Newcastle fans more pessimistic than right now. Yes, Sunderland made a better start to the season. They're still ahead in the table. And although it's only a week since the fine draw at Liverpool, Sunderland go into the derby on the back of the heaviest defeat of the season at Manchester City. Newcastle have run into form. And of course, they won their last away game in the league at Everton. So, does that change? There are so many angles that you can tackle this game. And I find one interesting point. I knew Sunderland would lose at Manchester City. I remember saying to someone on the Friday, Regis Lebris is such an arch. He plans so carefully, so surgically. And for most games this season, he's had a free week to plan the weekend. And of course, he only had a couple of days after the Liverpool game. And I just thought that, Sunderland wouldn't, whatever they were practicing, whatever their game plan was, it wouldn't have been done so thoroughly and intensely as previous games. Now, this week, very, very different. Newcastle have a game against Bayer Leverkusen. Sunderland have a clear week. It's going to be fascinating seeing the Newcastle team, because you'll be able to, if not second guess what the team will be on Sunday, you could have a fair idea with players who may be rested for one game or the other. When Newcastle lost in Marseille a fortnight ago, then I think that had an indirect bearing on this game, because Newcastle, ideally, to get in the knockout stages, they need to get something in Germany this week. And had they won in Marseille or even picked up a point, I think Eddie Howe would have rested players against Bayer Leverkusen in readiness for the derby. I don't think he'll do that quite so readily this time.
Yeah, it'd be such a shame if they got beat in Germany and struggled to qualify for the next stage, Ian, wouldn't it? But and I think you called Regis Lebris the professor the last time he was on, by the way. But sorry, go on, Ian.
I'm afraid Phil Smith's the one who.
Oh, right.
That name. I came up with the professor, the scientist.
Oh, that was it. That's it. I knew it was one of them. But just looking into that, I mean, I don't know how much you've seen them recently. I have to admit, I don't think I've seen Newcastle play once this season for probably obvious reasons. But that 3 wins in the first 11 games, followed by 3 wins and a draw. Has something changed?
Yes, very much so. The fullbacks. Having Livramento and Hoare available, it's a game changer for Newcastle United. They are young, they are energetic, they're vibrant, they're fast, they overlap and they invert. It gives Newcastle an added dimension, and I don't think it's any coincidence that Newcastle's form has improved since they have been available again.
Interesting stuff. And just on Sunderland, because you mentioned you kind of felt we would get beat at Manchester City. What have you made of our recent form? Because it's been a kind of frustrating kind of week, because playing Liverpool and Manchester City, but actually probably came away from both of them maybe thinking we could have gotten more out of them.
Yeah, you can massage stats, can't you? Sunderland, they've only won 1 in 6, and yet, when people looked at the December programme, you'd have certainly taken 4 points from the last 3 games. So it depends which way you're looking at it. Manchester City are now look as if they're in 5th gear again, and Sunderland were powerless to prevent a fairly comprehensive defeat at the Etihad Stadium. But suddenly, there's no alarm bell showed for Sunderland. I don't think that result on Saturday will particularly carry mental scars for the team.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, Gav, with those 2 games where, we talked about them afterwards and we thought, well, we could have gotten 3 points there. We could have maybe gotten a point there if just things had gone slightly different. Do you think the Sunderland players and they're going to use a bit of that frustration, do you think?
Maybe. I did say this on the pod after the Man City game, but the lack of aggression that we saw, particularly from Xhaka and Siddiqui, had a big bearing on the end result and the performance, I think, and you're not going to see them holding back. I would be very shocked if we know Siddiqui's not going to be available for the Brighton game because he's going to go away at AFCON, but I would be shocked if Granit Xhaka is, because there's no chance he's going to hold back against Newcastle, particularly in that battle against their midfield 3, which tends to be Joe Linton, Bruno Guimaraes, and Sandro Tonali. So he's going to really want to get in amongst them, and knowing the importance of the game and the way that these games tend to be refereed, you would imagine there'll be yellow cards flying about. So it's going to be a very different type of game. And I'll be honest, I think, and again, I wrote about this, I said this on the pod, that once Granit Xhaka and Siddiqui were taken off the pitch, there was a noticeable change in atmosphere from the Sunderland fans, who then diverted their full attention towards Newcastle. And it was almost a sign to the players on the pitch and to the coaches, we're over this. Next week's the important game. We're not bothered about this today. There's been very little negative fallout from the Man City game. I think there's been an acknowledgement that we could have done better. There's been an acknowledgement that possibly the second goal was poor defending, but nobody's really dwelled on it. And I don't think there's going to be any talk behind the scenes this week about Man City. It's going to be all on Newcastle, and it's going to be a very different game. We're at the Stadium of Light. That's the other thing. We're unbeaten there this season for a reason, and it's because we've made that a real fortress. I just think the players are going to be bang up for it. I genuinely can't imagine we're looking at Man City, even looking at Liverpool, where we probably should have won the game, and thinking too much about it. We'll probably be looking like I do, a bit more optimistically, saying last time we're at the Stadium of Light, produced the greatest comeback we've seen at the Stadium of Light in many, many years to get 3 points against Bournemouth. We got an unbelievable draw against Arsenal. We had a great hour against Everton where we came from behind. And then before that, we beat Chelsea. So I agree with what Ian says, you can kind of skew stats in which way you want. But when you actually take those games and performances in isolation, it's been a pretty positive month or so for us, I think. We've had even though we've not won many games, we've got some good results in amongst all of that. And I think it'll all feed into a really positive and well-channeled but aggressive attitude going into Sunday's game.
Do you know, everyone talks about the 12th man, and it's one of the most overused cliches in football. But Sunderland, the volume at the Stadium of Light, both before match and during match, has been quite incredible this season. Newcastle fans, they will never admit it publicly, but they'll be in for quite a shock. The acoustics are better at Stadium of Light at St James's Park. Listen, don't get me wrong, Newcastle is one of the most atmospheric grounds in the country, but fans themselves will say that it's been quiet this season, especially once war flags have had to display during games. There have been lulls. That's not been the case at the Stadium of Light. There's a freshness, a feel-good factor, a newness about it, hence the wonderful atmosphere. Now, Sunderland will need that. When Newcastle played in Marseille, everyone knows about the Marseille fans, and I remember the press conference was the fortnight ago, Regis de Priest talking about that, saying, Sunderland could do what Marseille did because it can be instrumental and it could work. If Sunderland start well and have Newcastle on the back foot, then that really will feel like for Newcastle players that they're playing 12 players.
Yeah, well, Kerry Louis-Dreyfus was there in person to see it all play out as well, wasn't he? But we mentioned the playoff win way back when, Ian, and the amount that was at stake then. You can look at 2008, 2009 when Sunderland took 4 points off Newcastle and we stayed up and Newcastle went down. There was a lot at stake in those games. But again, you look at this game, a gap of almost a decade and the different route the clubs have taken to get here. There's a point between them in the table, approaching the midway point of the season. And this one is almost a huge game just on a scale where it's kind of, where are the two clubs at the moment? How far has Sunderland come? And it feels like a huge one.
Absolutely. Of course, it's bragging rights. What this is a barometer. And I think both sets of fans would agree. Let's find out how close Sunderland are to Newcastle. Are they better than Newcastle this season? Or is there still a gap when push comes to shove between the two clubs? We'll know that on Sunday evening. But I think that's the key. It's about comparing this new look, vibrant Sunderland side with the Newcastle side who have been pushing the top places in the Premier League for several seasons now.
Yeah. And just a last point from you, Gav, on the game. I mean, the club have made every home game into an event, and I'm kind of struggling to imagine how far they're going to go with this one.
I know it's going to be interesting, isn't it? It works though. Ian kind of alluded to there. That these big shows, displays before the game, the build towards the big atmosphere, they make a massive, massive difference. And the pubs are going to be open early doors on Sunday. People are going to be merry by the time they walk into the ground. They're going to be well up for it, I'm sure. There's no doubt the atmosphere is going to be good. And we've got to make that count. We've made it count all season. It's been a big factor in the good results we've got at home this season. There's a real synergy between the players and the supporters, which is why we score so many really good late goals in games. And it doesn't really seem to matter who we play. It could be anybody. It could literally be the best team in the league. We will fight to the end to score goals. Not to preview the game too much, but it's been a bit of a weakness of Newcastle that they kind of can't hold on to leads and things through the season and concede late goals. That's interesting. Whereas on the other side of things, Sunderland concede a lot of early goals and come from behind. I just think it's shaping up. If you were a neutral watching this and you had no skin in the game and you didn't live in the Northeast, you'd be revved up to watch this game, because I think, if we're being honest, neutrals will struggle to call this one, and it just makes it such an interesting prospect. And I know there's a lot of Sunderland fans probably listening, absolutely bricking it. Hey, I can't wait. I cannot wait for this game. I can't wait to play them. I can't wait for the opportunity to put right 10 years of piss taking. If we manage to do it, it could end up being one of the best days we've ever had at the Stadium of Light. So just think positive, because the lads have given us absolutely no reason to doubt them at all this season at the Stadium of Light. Go into the game with their positivity and their passion for it, and we'll be all right, I'm sure.
God, this is Gav at the start of the week. Imagine what he's going to be like at the end of the week. But
I'm going to do not talk to me towards the end. I'll probably be frothing at the mouth.
Last word from you, Ian. Of course, look, I'm not going to ask for predictions because it's nonsense to ask predictions, especially in games like this. But like I said, I have
the answer to that. Have a
yeah,
clue.
well, exactly. But I haven't seen, as I said, I haven't seen much in Newcastle at all. I mean, is it two similar sides clashing against each other here, or do they have different styles? I mean, how closely matched are these two sides going into the game?
At their best, Newcastle's pressing game is as good as any in the division, and they can make it a very, very uncomfortable afternoon for their opponent's backline, who just wouldn't have time in the ball. Where Sunderland are so impressive is that they can high press and low block, and they can convert one to the other very, very quickly. They are two very, very well-coached sides. Neither manager I would call an idealist. They're both pragmatic in their styles. Labrie probably slightly more so than Howe. This is going to be a game where individuals, if they can win their battles, both captains will go into the game in prime form. Guimaraes is playing very, very well, probably better than Tonali and Jalinden right now. The Chow, the Newcastle centre-half, has been as impressive as either Ade Mukiele have been and Ballard. So there's very little to choose between them. Sunderland probably have the edge in the goalkeeper. I mean, I could go right the way through the team. Newcastle's wide men are beginning to score now, which could be ominous for Sunderland. Armada, he's an intriguing player, and this isn't the case of the Sunderland centre-halves having to get the better of him in a traditional centre-half, centre-forward role, because he will drop deep and he'll try and drag them out of positions. He's not the traditional number 9. So there's just so many battles between it. I've got a funny feeling that there will be one selection surprise by Regis Labrie. I've just got a funny feeling that there'll be one which we're not expecting.
I've had that feeling this last few days. Mm-hmm. I just think with the timing of the Diarra return, which we're led to believe could be around the derby. I mean, there's been a story out today in the Senegalese press about how he's expecting to be available for the game. There's that. There's been Romain Mundo's return in the last couple of weeks where he's been getting minutes off the bench and others haven't. He does trust him, and I doubt Eddie Howe's expecting him to start. I've had that feeling too, Ian. I've got a feeling that we might just see one or two strange or surprise selections that might be made just to throw Newcastle off a little bit.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise you if either Adingra or Mundle starts.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. He normally has something up his sleeve when it comes to something like this. There's been a couple of times this season there's been raised eyebrows, but as you were telling us before the game, before we started recording, I'm already onto the game. Apparently, fast the week, but you're going to be there, Ian.
Yes, I'm going to be there. Thoroughly looking forward. I'm looking forward to the atmosphere as much as I am the football.
Yeah, it's going to be brilliant. So I think that's a perfect place to leave it, because I think we've still got a lot of building up to do for this game this weekend. But it just leaves us to say thank you very much, Ian. It's been a pleasure. And coming from the expert almost on these between the two sides.
The pleasure's all mine.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ian. And Gav, pleasure as always, mate. And we're ramping it up, aren't we, this week?
We are indeed. We've got a conversation with Mark Douglas from iNewspaper this week. We're going to be chatting to him. We're doing Derby Memories. We're going to be looking back at our favourite games between ourselves. We've got the match day preview.
How do we pick?
I know there's so many. Me and Sam are probably going to do a pissed cast from the pub after the game, hopefully talking about a win. I think we're going to be joined by Scott Wilson the day after the game as well. So we've got loads around this match. And stick with us, because we're going to try and get you hyped for it. And hopefully it all leads to a nice day out for us. And hopefully when I do get to talk to Sam, and when you guys get to talk to Scott Wilson on Sunday or Monday even, we'll be talking about a Sunderland win. Let's hope.
Yeah, if we don't, we'll just cancel everything. And
it'll be we're going to have a break probably from the pod for the first time. We talked about 300 episodes. It might be another 300 days till you get an episode out of us if it's a particularly embarrassing day. I don't know.
Yep, football will shut down completely if we get beat. But anyway, thanks again, Gav. Cheers, mate.
No worries, mate.
And thanks again for everyone for listening. Like as I said, we really do appreciate it. As I said, we've gone over the 300 episode mark from our refresh last April, and we're very grateful for everyone who listens. But we've got loads more coming up, of course, as we build up to Sunday, either on the Ruck Report website or Howie the podcast, where we will have another podcast coming tomorrow. So look out for that. But from us, bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.